Hey, everybody. Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are about to have yet another amazing episode of our amazing show. So let's do it.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Hey, everybody. How are you doing? Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. It's going to be a tremendous show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We always know that they are messing with us. That's one of the weird things about YouTube is YouTube algorithms are very interesting. You don't exactly know what the story is. You're always trying to figure out different ways around the algorithm. You're always trying to figure out different ways around it. But one of the things that we do know is that part of the YouTube algorithm, I've Googled it, I've looked it up. Part of the algorithm is that it does unsubscribe people against their wishes. So if you'd like to be subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Make sure to hit the notifications bell so you get a notification every time we're doing one of these. Yeah, we are here. It is really awesome. So there we go. So there we go. So the way this works, for those of you who may not be familiar, is I write down your super chat questions as they come in. It looks like some of them are already coming in. So like this first one, did you see the unhinged Cubans yelling at Univision? All right. What is the utility of describing things as left-wing and right-wing? Does it confuse people? That's a good one. What is the utility of describing things as left-wing and right-wing? Does it confuse people? So the way this works is as super chat questions come in, I write them down, or I type them down, as I am doing right now. I type down the super chat questions. Then from there, I'm doing my opening remarks. I'm typing down the super chat questions as they roll in. I am typing them down, and then I do a roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who it is who's on the other side of the camera. And then after that, I start answering your super chat questions. And the whole second half of our show is just me answering your super chat questions. So if there's something you'd like me to talk about, do as Tom Michalak has done, do as Roy Asturitia has done, and send me yet another super chat. I'll add you to the list, and that's the way the second half of our show works. That's why it's so beautiful. So there you go. So folks, I'm just jumping into the opening remarks now. You may or may not be aware that I was in Miami for a few days. Arrived on Monday, covered Donald Trump's court date on Tuesday, came back on Wednesday, a short business trip. I was in Miami to cover Donald Trump's federal court arraignment for RT. It was a great trip. Got to see my buddy Mike. Shout out to you, Mike. Shout out to you, Mike, is a longtime friend. Got to have a great meal with Mike. It was really fun to eat with my buddy Mike. That was fun. What else did I get to do? What else? What else did I get to do? Well, I got to stand outside the courthouse in the hot sun for many, many hours in a crowd full of Trump supporters. And I got to interview them. The live conversation I did with those Trump supporters was awesome. If you haven't had a chance to watch, 23 minutes of me walking through the Trump crowd. I talked to a woman who had her home raided by the FBI. She talked about that. I talked with various Trump supporters about the Uhuru case and FBI repression, about why we shouldn't be sending money to Ukraine, about Joe Biden and his nefarious family connections with Ukraine and corruption. I argued with some Miami Cubans who had signs comparing Joe Biden to Fidel Castro and to Daniel Ortega. Yeah, it was quite a day. I confronted politely. I didn't, I don't want to be that crazy person. You never want to be that crazy person who runs up to somebody from a TV network they disagree with and goes, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't want to do that. I've had that done to me before. Not fun. Right. So I didn't want to be, but I did make a point of going up to Epoch Times guy and trying to engage him. Right. His real name is Roman Balankov. And Roman Balankov, he is a reporter for the Epoch Times, and he does a show that is very anti-China. Shout out to Jeff Young, by the way. Jeff Young, great candidate, political figure in Kentucky, does great anti-imperialist work. Glad you're watching, Jeff. I didn't want to, so I was polite. If you watch the clip of me talking to the Epoch Times guy, I didn't go crazy at him. I just kind of said, do we really want to have a war with China? And, I feel like it was a polite exchange. I wasn't trying to be a crazy guy. Afterwards, I shook his hand. I thanked him for talking to me, right? That was an important conversation. I also got to go up to Kari Lake. Do people know who Kari Lake is? Kari Lake was the MAGA Republican candidate for governor of Arizona, who made allegations regarding the elections in Arizona a central plank of her campaign. And she was there outside the courtroom. And I got to go up to Kari Lake, and I thanked Kari Lake for her support of Julian Assange. I said he's a hero, and she said he is a hero, and she smiled back at me. So I had my interaction with Kari Lake. So it was quite a day between talking to the Epoch Times guy, talking to Kari Lake, having a great conversation with the Trump supporters about the CIA and the FBI and Ukraine and stuff. It was a very, very productive day. I did multiple stories for RT. Did a story the night beforehand, walking around the federal building, kind of a preview to Trump's arraignment. Did multiple lives from the courthouse, outside the courthouse, in the media circus that was out there. Did a late night around 1 a.m. our time. I went on and talked about it. And then I filmed a story the next day. So it was a very productive trip. Got a lot done. Handed out a lot of CPI business cards about the Center for Political Innovation. These nice business cards. Shout out to Timoshenko, who designed these. They say, we need a government of action to fight for working families. Got word out about CPI, which is good. It was overall, I would say, a productive trip. You got to make the most of it. And I'm really glad I went down to Miami. Really, really glad I went down to Miami. It's funny. I see your question there. You said, what is Lysenkoism? And I'm thinking, is this Jeopardy? What is Lysenkoism? Very good. Now I'll take sociology for 300. But yes, I will answer the question. But overall, yes, it was a productive trip. It was a productive trip. I'm glad I went down there. I have not ever been to Miami before, believe it or not. I've been to Florida before. When I was a kid, my grandparents briefly lived in Florida. They did not like it. They moved back to Missouri. But I remember when I was a very small child going down to Missouri, going down to Florida to visit my grandparents while they lived down there. They thought they wanted to retire there, but they didn't like it. So they moved back to Missouri. Home sweet home. So I had that experience, but what I remember about Florida is the fire ants. That's what I remember when I was a kid. These ants that were bright red that bit you and it hurt. They didn't have those in Ohio, but they have those down in Florida. And I remember getting bit by fire ants. That's what I remember about being in Florida. So there you go. No fire ants this time. I did put on a lot of sunscreen. As you can see my face, I am light skinned. I am a very, very fair skinned redhead. And the sun down there is killer. So I bought really expensive spray can of sunscreen. And every time before I went outside, I just sprayed it on big time to make sure I didn't burn my face because, it's interesting. You don't really sunburn very much after 2:00 in the afternoon. 2:00, 3:00, that's about the cutoff, right? Even if it's bright, sunny, and the sun is shining directly on you, about 2, 3:00, you're good. But noontime, 1 in the afternoon, 11, oh man, if you were out in the sun in those times, you're coming back red-faced. You're going to be red-faced for a day or two. Not a fun experience. If you are not a person who sunburns, you are very lucky. You are very, very lucky because it is not a pleasant experience. Not a pleasant experience. One of the curses of having very light skin. We redheads are very susceptible to sunburns. Red-haired people, our skin is different than other people. Interesting. You can read all about this, right? Being red-haired is not simply a matter of your hair being red, right? It comes with, your skin is a little bit different. There's all kinds of stuff, It's very, very interesting to look into that, right? But anyhow, so I had my little trip to Miami. It was productive. Glad I went down there. Now I'm back. I'm here in front of the lovely bookshelf. And I got to tell you, I am so excited. Absolutely thrilled. I am just thrilled about our upcoming CPI workshop that's happening. You don't know about it, I will put the image of it on our screen here. I'll just put it on the screen. If you're aware, just so you're aware, right, of it, it is going to be pretty gosh darn awesome. It's going to be pretty cool. This is the logo designed by CPI President Elizabeth Young, a roadmap for America, an introduction to the city building tendency. It is going to be a 3-day workshop put on by the Center for Political Innovation. It'll be near St. Louis, Missouri. Not a public event, right? We're not posting an address or anything like that. It is a guests and CPI members only event. So if you want to come, you just have to join CPI and you'll get an invitation. It is open to CPI members. And on top of that, it is open. We are inviting, we obviously have friends in the Party of Communist USA. We have different friends and allies in different parts of the country. And we're expecting a good 30 people to be there, maybe more. We're still finalizing the guest list. There's just a lot of maybes we've gotten, some definite confirmations. And, we're going to have catered food. There's going to be, different speeches and presentations by people. There's going to be music. It's going to be a great weekend that people from our great community will be able to get together, talk about strategy, talk about building our organization, talk about how we can work to promote anti-imperialism, talk about how we can build up our community, how we can utilize the upcoming election cycle, because we don't endorse any candidate, mind you. We don't endorse any candidate, right? We do not endorse any candidate. Let me emphasize once again, we do not endorse any candidate. We do not campaign for any candidate. So we have really no involvement in the U.S. election cycle other than election season is a great time to meet people, right? And that the kind of people that would like what CPI is about are the kind of people that might campaign for the People's Party or the Green Party or RFK or Marianne Williamson or even Donald Trump. doubt there would be many Biden fans that would like CPI, but you never know because we don't endorse any candidate. We are an anti-imperialist educational organization. We do not endorse any candidate. However, there's nothing wrong with deploying our members during this time to meet people and to utilize the opening created by elections to engage with people and build up our anti-imperialist community. And that's what we are trying to do. That is what we are trying to do. And so we're going to have orientation about that, good music, good speeches. Everyone who comes, we're getting together the packet that everyone who attends will get. Everyone's going to get a CPI t-shirt. You will get your own CPI t-shirt. You will get your own copy of my recent book. Everyone coming will get their own copy of this book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. You'll get your own copy of this book and some other books, it looks like. We're going to have buttons for people. Everyone who comes is going to get a packet full of CPI stuff. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a great weekend meetup. So if you're not a member of CPI, become one today so you can come to our weekend workshop that we are doing. And the event that we're doing the second week of July is definitely happening. We are definitely doing an event about the legal system in America and how it targets poor people in New York City. I am in the process of nailing down the venue, but it looks like it'll be on a university campus here in New York City. 3 very prominent lawyers are coming. Can't tell you who they are, but you will know when we announce the event. 3 prominent lawyers that I know that are friends of mine. I consider all 3 of them to be friends of mine. They are coming to give a speech, presentation about how the legal system in the United States unfairly targets low-income people. That's going to be awesome. We're just, we are in the process. Once the space is reserved, Peter Coffin, our beloved filmmaker, CPI member, he is making a documentary film about this forum and about how the legal system targets poor people and low-income people that'll go along with the themes of it's going to be it is just going to be a great event. Different friends are coming down. And so not only are we having our workshop, our 3-day workshop that we are doing in Missouri, not only are we having that, we are also then having second week of July, our forum, right? A public event with speeches that will be then used to make a great documentary by Peter Coffin. So we are doing awesome stuff. We are doing awesome stuff in CPI. I am so excited. We are marching ahead as an organization, and it's really, really great. And I'm in a good mood right now because building organizations is what makes me happy. It's what makes me feel alive. It gives me, kind of a purpose. It's something that I've always drawn a great amount of joy from. As frustrating as it can be sometimes, as much as people disappoint you, when we're building, when we are moving ahead, when we're bringing people together, when we're making things happen, it's a great feeling. It is a really, really great feeling to know that you are getting something done. You're making a contribution. It's a great feeling. And I hope that you will know what that feeling is someday. I hope that I can inspire you to feel this way at some point in your life, because it is a great feeling. However, I've got to warn you all, beneath this great feeling that I have about building our organization, membership in CPI is rising. We just had another person join today. People are joining every few days. I get another membership. Our membership is rising and rising and rising. We're well above 90 members. I think it was 92, 95 last time I checked. Our membership is approaching 100 pretty soon. That's great. And we're expanding and we're reinventing our recruitment strategy. A lot of things are happening. Many people that really want to get stuff done in the group are different subdivisions of the group are forming to carry out different tasks. And you have no idea how exciting things are. I am just so thrilled about what's going on with the organization. But behind my optimism about building an anti-imperialist community, about spreading anti-imperialist politics to the masses of people, there is a desperation. Because I'm telling you all, a storm is coming. A storm is coming. If you think that we are living in ordinary times in America, you are dead wrong. We are facing a long-term capitalist crisis that has translated into a political crisis of divisions in the ruling class. And there's a storm on the horizon. And let me tell you, all that matters right now is how much of a ship we can build before the floodwaters start rising. That is all that matters. Doesn't matter how many people are watching this stream right now. Doesn't matter how many likes I get. Doesn't matter how many shares you get. Doesn't matter what your teacher thinks of you, what your parents think of you, what your classmates think of you. All that matters is when the floodwaters come, are you going to have an ark to get on? Are you going to have a ship to get on when the floodwaters come, or are you going to get swept away? Because the storm is coming. The storm is coming. And I think people don't really understand that. The storm is coming. And the term that we have been using to describe this, which I think it's important, we got to have ways of explaining this. We got to have our own. Sometimes you have to use lingo. Sometimes you have to have buzz phrases. Sometimes you have to have terminology and words to describe things that are not the normal terminology, that are not the normal words people use. So at the Center for Political Innovation, lately we've been talking about strategic equilibrium. Strategic equilibrium. That is the phrase that we have been using. I've been warning people that we will soon approach strategic equilibrium. Now, if you look up the phrase strategic equilibrium, you will inevitably come across strategy games. You'll come across geopolitical writing. Strategic equilibrium generally refers to a state of play or conditions in which one side cannot completely overwhelm another. And that's what it generally refers to. It is a strange phrase, strategic equilibrium. However, in Maoist Maoist military strategy, it refers to a point in the process of People's War where the game changes. All right, that if you read classic Maoist guerrilla warfare, which is not what we're talking about here, when Mao is writing about military waging People's War, what Mao talks about is he says first you're seizing liberated territory in the countryside, and you seize liberated territory. You carve out one area, you carve out another area. You have a base area. You expand operations outside the base area. That's what it generally means. And then, according to the general Maoist guerrilla warfare strategy, once you've built up enough liberated territory, you've achieved what they tend to refer to in Maoist guerrilla warfare as strategic equilibrium, which means all of a sudden you have enough base area that you now have to drastically change your tactics to take the cities, because it's no longer a game of just carving out liberated territory on the margins of society. Now you can move toward taking the cities. Now, we're not waging guerrilla warfare here. Trust me. I don't want to go to prison, and the United States is not a country where one could do such a thing. We're not left adventurists, anything like that. Right? That's not what I'm getting at all. And if you're hearing that, you're misinterpreting my words. What I'm saying is that we are coming up on a point that is similar to the point of strategic equilibrium in Maoist military theory. Because when the storm comes, the rules of the game will suddenly shift. Right? In Maoist guerrilla strategy being waged in a third world country, when you hit strategic equilibrium, suddenly the rules of the game change. Because you have enough forces that you can start taking the cities. You have to enter alliances with different cities. All the rules of the game change. All of a sudden, you're not just waging war in the countryside. All of a sudden, you're now contending for political power. And what I'm telling you is the struggle in the United States right now, in a way, in a very vague way, is similar to guerrilla warfare in the countryside. Because in the guerrilla warfare in the countryside, you're only operating on the margins of society. You're only operating very far from quote unquote civilization. You're only operating in the remote regions among the poorest of the poor, carving out liberated territory. And that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're only operating and recruiting people that are already against the status quo. We're only recruiting people that are already, looking for something, that don't have peace with the establishment, are angry at the government, are looking for something different. The kind of people that join CPI right now, the kind of people that listen to Jimmy Dore, the kind of people that, that get into QAnon, the kind of people who, the kind of people that get into infrared or start reading anti-imperialist books or watching Gray Zone. It's a small percentage of U.S. society. It's marginal. Right? And that's kind of what we're doing right now as CPI. Right? There's a section of the kind of people who would go to the Rage Against the War Machine rally in Washington, D.C., the kind of people that are listening to Jimmy Dore, that are listening to, Tara Reid and Garland Nixon, the Tulsi Gabbard fans, the people that have been reading Noam Chomsky books, the people that are part of this anti-imperialist fringe of U.S. society, that listen to Sputnik Radio, that watch RT, that like Gray Zone, that is who, Kim Iverson, that's the kind of people that join CPI right now. And I love you all. But we know we're not the broad masses of people. We know we're not the bulk of the population. We're not. Right? Right now, we are far from the mainstream. We are very far from the mainstream. We are a group of people who, for our own psychological reasons, went looking for this. Right? Most of us are not driven out of economic necessity. I mean, we've had a hardship. Many of us have had struggled, having jobs or paying off our student loans, or have had a relative lose their home, or have had medical bills that are unfair. But for the most part, it is an intellectual question that drives us. We want to know more than most people do. We go digging through the internet and through books and through history looking for answers. Those are the kind of people that join CPI right now. And I love you all. However, there will come a time where we will hit strategic equilibrium, where the conditions of U.S. society will deteriorate. And the process that I describe in this book, the process of Bonapartism, and divisions within the ruling class, and factions in the ruling class contending with each other for power, will escalate to the point that many more people will be forced to engage with the kinds of ideas we're talking about and pick sides. And that will be a whole new ballpark. Conditions in the U.S. in the next couple years are going to very dramatically deteriorate. I know it's not an optimistic, hopeful thing to say. It's just a fact. right? And it's already happening gradually. But there will be some pretty big drops ahead. People talk about the dollar collapsing. People talk about unemployment and the fallout and, all these sanctions with Russia, and look into the details, right? There's a big drop going to happen pretty soon. Conditions are already bad. The infrastructure of the country is falling apart. The jobs just aren't there. There's going to be a very dramatic drop. And when that drop happens, there will be many people who will be desperate to join an organization. And it won't be because they're interested. It won't be because they want to know what's wrong with society and they're digging through the internet looking for Caleb Maupin to give them answers and tell them about the history of Stalin. It won't be because of that. It will not be because of that. It will be because of the fact that material conditions force people, right? Again, do I have to read to you from the Communist Manifesto? I guess I do. I'm going to pull up the Communist Manifesto. Section of the Communist Manifesto. People forget how rich the Communist Manifesto is. It is not, I read it, the first time I read it, there was so much that just went right over my head, right? But it's a really rich document. There are so many little paragraphs in there that have really important concepts in them. This is a section of the Communist Manifesto. I will read it to you. But with the development of industry, the proletariat not only increases in number, it becomes concentrated in greater mass. Its strength grows, and it feels that strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of the proletariat are more and more equalized, and in proportion as machinery obliterates all distinction of labor, nearly everywhere reduces wages to the same low level. The growing competition among the bourgeois, resulting in commercial crises, makes the wages of workers ever more fluctuating. The increasing improvement of machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more and more precarious. The collisions between the individual workman and the individual bourgeois take more and more the character of a collision between two classes. Thereupon, the workers begin to form combinations against the bourgeoisie. They club together in order to keep the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provisions beforehand for occasional revolts. Right? The working class starts to bond together out of economic necessity. They form combinations out of economic necessity as living conditions deteriorate, as workers are replaced by machines, as machinery reduces the role of the worker in production, as living standards go down, as conditions become worse, as the capitalists begin clashing with each other and having financial crises, conditions for the working class get worse and worse and worse, and the working class are forced to form combinations out of necessity. Right now, conditions are not, for the most part, bad enough that people form combinations out of necessity. But if you go to any country that has had a revolution, that's the kind of situation they're in. The working class is struggling to survive. And in order to survive, they have to band together. And what happens next? Again, just a few more lines down the Communist Manifesto. The bourgeoisie finds itself involved in a constant battle, at first with the aristocracy, and later on with portions of the bourgeoisie itself, whose interests are antagonistic to the progress of industry. All the time with the bourgeois of foreign countries. In all these battles, it sees itself compelled to appeal to the proletariat, to ask for help, and thus drag it into the political arena. The bourgeoisie, therefore, supplies the proletariat with its own elements and general direction. In other words, it furnishes the proletariat with weapons for fighting the bourgeoisie. Aha! So not only is the working class suffering more and more, and they're forced to form combinations and come together to fight for their own interests, but at the same time, the capitalists are fighting among themselves. And they start appealing to the working class as their foot soldiers to fight other capitalists. This is called Bonapartism. So the working class, their conditions become so bad that they're appealing, they're coming together out of interest. And the capitalists are increasingly trying to recruit the workers to be their foot soldiers in these struggles. And what happens next? In times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour, the progress of dissolution going on within the ruling class, in fact, the whole range of society assumes a violent, glaring character. Now, what does that mean? He's talking about fascism, saying when the economic crisis becomes so bad, when the fighting among the capitalists becomes so intense that all of society just starts coming apart, in times when the class struggle nears the decisive hour and the progress of dissolution going on within the old ruling class, in fact, within the whole range of society, assumes a violent, glaring character, then a small section of the ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class, the class that holds the future in its hands. Just as, therefore, in an earlier period, a section of the nobility went over to the bourgeoisie, now a portion of the bourgeoisie goes over to the proletariat, and in particular, a portion of the bourgeois ideologists who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement of the whole. Meaning that as the working class is brought into motion by the capitalists who are fighting among themselves, as the working class is forced to come together and work in its own economic interests, increasingly the working class becomes so empowered and society starts to deteriorate and the crisis takes on a violent character that some of the capitalists join with the workers. There we go. Can you hear me now? Got that super chat down. This microphone, I swear, very annoying that this microphone goes off sometimes, but it seems to be back on now. There we go. Anyway, I wrote down the super chat that Ted Sawyer sent in on the Rockfin. So I wrote that down. It is on the list of super chats. But this is a process. What's happening in America is a process. And it is a process of capitalism breaking down. It is a process of the capitalists fighting among themselves. It is a process of the working class coming together and asserting their own interests, and sections of the ruling class entering strategic alliances with the working class. This is all a process, right? And we are heading towards strategic equilibrium. We are heading toward a moment where we will not be operating on the fringes of society. Right now, we are operating in fringe political space. We are operating among sections of society, among the broad masses of people. And these sections are certainly bigger than they've ever been in my lifetime, right? More people are open to hearing this freedom of information through the internet, plus the crisis of society has opened a lot of people's minds. But it is still out of intellectual interest and alienation from society that people drift into our circles. And that is not enough to change the nature of society, right? That the process through which socialism emerges out of capitalism is a process in which society breaks down due to material conditions. We are heading towards strategic equilibrium. What we need now is a network of people who are anti-imperialist, who believe in class struggle. And when we hit strategic equilibrium, this network we have built can reorient itself to operate very differently in the face of the crisis, to align itself with sections of the old ruling class and of the old state. As society breaks down, enters a violent character, to build a united front. This is all in the Communist Manifesto, right? This is kind of Marxism 101, but people don't think about this. People don't think about this. I talk a lot about kindergarten communism. This is a capitalist. This is a worker. That's way too simple. When you're talking about how do revolutions actually happen, how do revolutionaries operate, how do you build an organization, it's much more complicated than that. There are divisions in the ruling class. There's one faction that is focused on trying to reboot capitalism with degrowth. There's another faction of the ruling class that is entrepreneurial and just wants to make money. We have a huge military industrial complex in the United States. In addition to that, we have an intelligence apparatus, and there is a rising anti-imperialist bloc around the world centered around Russia and China. All of this is important. And if you don't take any of this into account, if you just sit there and go, this is a capitalist, this is a worker, which is what most of the so-called Marxist material on the internet does, if that is all that you can do, you're going to be lost. You're going to be lost. And look, one theme that we keep coming back to, right? We keep coming back to, I just, we just keep coming back to this, which is that the proletarian movement is much older than Karl Marx. The first proletarians were in ancient Rome. The first proletarians were in ancient Rome, and they were the class who didn't have any slaves, but the class who didn't have any property either. They were the men of no property. Proletarians. And as the proletarians began to assert their rights in ancient Rome, according to Karl Kautsky, in his great book, The Foundations of Christianity, the religion of Christianity became the expression of the proletarian movement. Christianity that worshipped a Messiah, a Jewish Messiah, who was a carpenter, who said that there is only one God, who was killed by the Roman Empire, crucified, but rose again. Right? This ancient Roman religion was the proletarian movement. They believed that Jesus would return, he would tear down the empire. And the proletarians, they formed combinations. They formed orphanages for the unemployed, homeless children. They fed each other, they cared for each other, but they also organized strikes and fought for their rights. And Christianity, when it began, was a revolutionary movement among the Roman proletariat. Why were the Bible, the books of the Bible originally written in Greek? Greeks and Jews were the bulk of the Roman proletariat. The bulk of the skilled craftsmen who moved to Rome, who didn't own any slaves, but were not owned by anybody else, had no property. The pipe fitters, the blacksmiths, the jewelers, the bricklayers, the carpenters of ancient Rome, they were the proletarians, and they were Jews, and they were Christians, and they were Greeks and Jews, and they largely began to convert in mass to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ that were imported to Rome, right? The followers of this ancient, this Messiah who was killed by the Roman Empire, his teachings somehow got into Rome. And in Rome, which was the capital of the known world, where you had a growing proletariat, the proletarians all began worshiping Jesus the Christ. And they understood that Jesus the Christ would return and destroy the empire. And the last would be first, and the first would be last. This is what Revelations 6:15 says. It says, "Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich and the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves among the rocks and the mountains. And they called to the mountains and the rocks, 'Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne, from the wrath of the Lamb. For the day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it?'" Right? That's what the Christians were saying. They said, this empire that you've got, this mighty empire you Romans have built, where you drag people into your arena to make them fight each other and you feed people to lions. This empire you've got based on extracting slaves and tribute from all over the world. One day, our Savior, a humble carpenter who you brutally murdered and put to death, one day he is going to return, and the kings of the earth and the princes and the generals and the rich and the mighty and everyone else, both slave and free, will hide in the caves and among the rocks and the mountains. And they'll call to the mountains and to the rocks, 'Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the Lamb of the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it?'" Right? Christianity, when it began, was a movement of the proletariat. It was a movement of the Roman proletariat. This is Karl Kautsky. It was a movement of the Roman proletariat to assert their rights. And Karl Kautsky does a lot to document this, that it was the political expression of the Roman proletariat. Very interesting. Right? In ancient Rome, the way Rome was set up, every profession had its own religious practices. Rome was a polytheistic society. They believed in many, many gods. And, every profession had its own religious, practices, right? There was the cult of Neptune, and that was sailors, people who worked in the sea, the ocean, the Roman Navy. And there was a special temple to the god Neptune. And there were certain ceremonies and practices that only sailors and naval members of the Roman Navy practiced, because it was they called it their mystery, the Roman mystery, or the Roman mystery religion, right? And that there was certain knowledge and wisdom that, if you were a sailor for so many years, you learned a little bit more. And if you were a sailor for so many years, you learned a little bit more. This is the beginning of like the guilds, right? That later in medieval Europe, it was big. There was a guild of blacksmiths. You had to do an apprenticeship before you could become a blacksmith. The beginning of the guilds in Rome, their own version of the guilds were what they called the mysteries, the mystery religions. And there were mystery religions. There was like the Order of Mars, which was among the military. There was a certain sections of the military they called military orders that had their own honor code, their own, ceremonies, etc. And that Roman society, the way it was organized, was basically they couldn't have everyone believe the same thing, because the society was too vast. And so they had some teachings that were for the military, some religious and spiritual practices that were for the military. They had some religious and spiritual practices that were for the blacksmiths. They had some religious and spiritual practices that were for the sailors. They had some religious and spiritual practices that were for the landowners. And that this is how Roman society was. Right? There were many different mystery cults within the official Roman religion. Officially, they believed the Roman emperor was a god, a man god, right? He was a god on earth. They practiced polytheism. They believed, there were, Jupiter and they had certain gods that they worshiped. But within Roman society, right? Within Roman society, there were many different mystery religions or practices. And the way every profession or caste of society operated was it had its own religious practices. Christianity began as the mystery religion of the Roman proletariat. the Roman proletariat, as it began to organize and assert its rights, Christianity became its mystery religion, right? And this is the origin of the religion. And many people agree on this, that yes, Christianity started in Palestine, but it really caught on as a religion when it got to Rome. And the reason that it caught on in Rome was because Rome had a proletariat and Christianity was the religion of the proletariat. I really recommend you go and read The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky. This is a very, very dynamic book that gets into this in great details, written by the leader of Marxism in Europe, right? Karl Kautsky was the leader of European Marxism, late 1800s, early 1900s, and he was living in Germany. And in Germany in like 1903, he wrote this very powerful book, The Foundations of Christianity. And I've got it somewhere. I've got it somewhere on my bookshelf here. But it's a very, very powerful book, and I really recommend it. I really think people should read The Foundations of Christianity because it's very powerful. And it talks about the role. It's over there on my bookshelf. It's on the, I don't have it behind me. But it talks about the role of Christianity. So the proletarian movement, when it really gets down to it, is much more all-encompassing and has been around a lot longer than just Marxism, right? Karl Marx was a guy who lived in Europe, 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, but it's much older than that. Christianity was the first expression of the proletarian political current. And the proletarians, as we understand, are the final class of history. Right? There will be no more classes. Right? The proletarians will abolish all other classes. Right? That they are the final class of history because it is in their ultimate interest to abolish. It is in their ultimate interest to abolish all classes and to move toward a stateless, classless world, a world of so much wealth and abundance that classes break down and that there is no more inequality and no more social hierarchies. And all this is really important. And I'm telling you all about this. You've heard it all from me before, but this is all really important because I'm telling you how urgent it is, how absolutely urgent it is that we build a network because the crisis is coming. Right. And look, we gotta focus on what actually matters. And what actually matters is preparing for strategic equilibrium. Right. We are going to hit strategic equilibrium pretty soon. And if we're not ready, things could be very, very bad. Right. U.S. society is heading off a cliff. Right. Everybody can see that. Everybody can see that U.S. society is heading off a cliff. The divisions in society, the economic fallout, turn on your TV. We all know society is heading off a cliff. Now, it is important that we prepare for the coming crisis and that we have a network and an apparatus that is prepared to enter into strategic alliances with one faction of the ruling class, that is prepared to, offer the leadership when the working class is in motion. That's what we got to do, right? We don't create the crisis. The crisis is created by material conditions. We have to be ready for the crisis. We have to be prepared, right? So that is something I wanted to remind you all of. And being in Miami and talking to a crowd of Trumpers and all that reminded me of this. Right? It just reiterated that to me. And that's why I'm dedicated to building the Center for Political Innovation. So those of you who can join us coming up in Missouri, great. Those of you who can join us the first week of July at the forum we do with the lawyers, that's going to be great. Date is to be announced very soon. I'm in the process of reserving the space, but that's definitely happening. That's really, really great. And we're building a network here. We are building a network of people here who will be able to come together to protect each other and to offer the guidance needed for when the crisis escalates, because the crisis is going to escalate. The storm is coming, but you got to build the ship before the storm. You got to build the ship before the storm. You cannot build the ship in the storm. We, the City Building Tendency, the Center for Political Innovation, we are trying to build the ship that will be very necessary when the storm hits. I just got to tell you, right? I'm not going to say any names because there's no point, right? Because these are all people I like, right? And I'll be honest, I retweet these people. I like them, but I hope some of them are watching. I doubt they are. But, you know, there are a lot of people who agree that Russia and China are the future, agree that Western capitalism is collapsing, agree that US society is headed toward a low-wage police state, agree with the bulk of our worldview, but are so focused on shit that doesn't really matter. That are so focused on, oh my God, did I get likes? Did I get clicks? Oh my God, I don't want to be next to that person. Someone might think I have cooties. Oh my God. That are just so focused on shit that doesn't matter. When the floodwater comes, oh my God. Oh, do you think the floodwater, they're not going to flood over this person? Oh, he's got 100 likes on his Facebook. He's not going to get flooded. Doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way, my friends. When the storm comes, what matters is, do you have a ship or not? That's what matters, right? When the flood comes, when the storm comes, it's not going to matter. Oh, I have 1,000 likes. Oh, I've got none of that's going to matter. None of that's going to matter, right? And that there's just I see so much of this childish vanity. People get caught up in this social media thing. Oh, I'm so much more popular. Oh, I'm better than this person. Oh, this person's a goofball. and I just see so much of this childish vanity. And, you can know the truth. You get a lot of points for realizing that, the war, sending weapons to Ukraine is bullshit and that China is not our enemy. You get a lot of points for that in my book. I respect you a lot more, right? You get a lot of points in my book if you understand that Donald Trump being prosecuted right now is bullshit and it's part of the USA becoming an authoritarian state. Trump wasn't perfect, but, locking him up to prevent him from running for office is pretty dangerous, right? You get points in my book if you realize that, right? And I respect you if you're able to shred through the lies and see the truth. You get points in my book, and that's why I'll keep retweeting you, even if you annoy me. And I'll promote these people here and there. But a lot of y'all, if you're watching, you're caught up on bullshit that doesn't matter. You are caught up and you're worried about shit that does not matter. Writing it down. Right? And I'm just telling you that you are caught up in shit that just doesn't matter. And there's just a huge amount of that I see. Just people that are just caught up in all of this nonsense. Right? And it's like they don't want to be seen with this person and they just, blah, blah. It's like, you can get worried about that if you want. I mean, but I'm just telling you, none of that is really going to matter. And time is running out. And I get optimistic and I get excited. I'm really excited. I'm heading out to Missouri next week and really excited for the event we're doing in New York City in July. And I'm excited and I'm happy and I'm calling people I haven't called in a long time and making new connections and excited for all the people I'm going to see and making sure everything's in order. And I'm excited for the different presentations and helping different people in CPI prepare presentations they're going to make and working with Peter Coffin on the film he's about to make about our legal event. I'm enjoying it, right? I'll be honest. I really enjoy this kind of stuff, right? I live for this stuff. I've been organizing my whole life. I believe in the cause. I love speaking. I love writing. I love community. I love the feeling of comradeship and brotherhood. I love all this, right? But underneath all of it, in addition to the joy that I get from this, there is a desperation because the storm is coming. And if we're not ready when the storm comes, I mean, we had our chance and we missed it. Right? And I'm just reiterating that point, right? Because people that are caught up on stuff that doesn't matter, you're going to miss the boat. You're going to miss the boat. You're going to miss the boat. And I've heard it all. I have heard it all. And, I've heard what these people have to say, and they all hate each other. Right? I have got to tell you, and I'll stop and we'll start doing the roll call and I'll start answering super chats and stuff. But I got to tell you that I've heard it all. I have heard it all. And that it's like there is no desire for unity among anti-imperialists right now. You don't get points for fighting with people. You don't. I mean, you don't. I mean, you get points for making allies and friends. You get points for getting stuff done in the real world. You don't get points for fighting with anybody, right? The only place you get points for fighting with other people is on social media. Social media is very good at getting people to fight with each other. And I'm just telling you that again, none of the stuff that you're getting worked up about and upset about, none of that's going to matter when the floodwater starts rising. So and they're all fighting with each other. So many of the people in our community who know that Russia and China are not our enemy, who know that, we're headed toward a low-wage police state, who know that we're headed toward a financial crisis, they spend all their time squabbling with other people in our community over what? Over personalities, over aesthetics, over, I don't know, over shit that doesn't matter. Shit that does not matter. Shit that just doesn't matter. I'm at the point where, I'm a Marxist, but Rage Against the War Machine, Mises Caucus, libertarians, hey, they marched with Rage Against the War Machine. We had our great demonstration with the Liberty Speaks people, Irene and people from the Mises Caucus. Great. Am I going to spend my time quibbling with them about the history of communism? Nope. Because our political goals are the same. Right. And, I'm at the point where I just don't care anymore. Right. Again, two big political tests. One, Uhuru. If people can't understand how dangerous the indictment against the Uhuru movement is, threatening them with 10 years in prison for having Zoom calls about Ukraine. And two, Rage Against the War Machine. If people can't understand how important that rally was, it was more important because there were conservatives there, because Tulsi Gabbard was there, because the Libertarian Party backed it. It was not less important. It was more important. That's the beginning of a real united front. That's why it's goddamn important, right? It's the beginning of a real united front, and that's why it's important. So, if people who couldn't understand why Rage Against the War Machine was important, people who can't understand why the jailing of the Uhuru movement is important, they missed the boat. Jeff gets it. He knows how dangerous what they're doing to the Uhuru movement is, and he knows how important Rage Against the War Machine was, and those are the two test issues. And I see so many people I used to have a lot of respect for, and the Uhuru movement got indicted and they didn't say anything about it. Or they said, cult, rumor. I'm just like, are you serious? They're going to drag away 4 of our comrades. They're going to drag us away. They're going to drag away 4 of our comrades. And on the grounds of saying shit that we already say, and you're not going to, I don't get it. Or Rage Against the War Machine happened. Big mobilization with a lot of backing behind it, where all kinds of people from different sides of the political spectrum, Chris Hedges, Garland Nixon, Tara Reid, Tulsi Gabbard, Judge Napolitano, are gathering to say, let's not have World War III. And you're going to go, I don't know, those racist, oath keepers, Jackson Hinkle, and I'm just like, guys, I will throw this one out there. This is something I've said for a long time, right? And I've said this before, that people that operate on the fringes of politics, right? A lot of people that have been thinking about anti-imperialism and communism in America for a long time, they've gotten into Little League baseball, right? What do they tell kids in Little League baseball? They say it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. And that makes sense, right? Because, you couldn't win. Right? In the United States during the Cold War, if you believed in communism, you couldn't win. The bulk of the country was against the Soviet Union, was on the side of US imperialism. If you were against imperialism, you were against the war machine, you couldn't win. You were a very fringe minority. So they got into this mindset of who cares if we actually accomplish anything? Just so long as we feel good about ourselves, just so long as we can look ourselves in the mirror and say, we're the most morally pure. Yeah, well, maybe we didn't win, but America's evil and America's racist and we're the good American. And that's how they are. And trust me, I have spent so much time around communist and anti-war boomers. They've gotten into this mindset of it doesn't matter if we win or lose. Doesn't matter if we ever accomplish anything. All that matters is that we can feel good about ourselves. And, if there's no chance of ever winning, that's a place you can easily get to. We are not in those times anymore. There is an opportunity for us to actually win. We're entering a period where U.S. imperialism is actively collapsing. The capitalists are actively fighting amongst themselves. The anti-imperialist countries are rising. They've recovered amazingly since the fall of the Soviet Union. Anti-imperialism is rising around the world. Capitalism is facing a long-term economic crisis because of the computer revolution. We are entering a period where we could actually win. But in order to win, we gotta get our shit together. And so this mindset that says, oh, who cares if we actually win? We just want to be the most morally pure. That feeds into the cancel culture. That feeds into the we aren't going to go to Rage Against the War Machine. They are racist. It feeds into this, this mindset where it's like, real politics. In real politics, it doesn't matter how you play the game. It matters if you win or lose. Little League Baseball, yeah, it doesn't matter if you win or lose, just matters how you play the game. Real politics doesn't matter how you play the game. It matters if you win or lose, right? And we're entering a period where we could actually win. And so the orientation has to completely change. It has to completely change. So we're trying to build a ship in the storm, a ship before the storm comes. We're trying to build a network of anti-imperialists. We're trying to teach this ideology, and we're trying to prepare for a strategic equilibrium when the rules of the game will dramatically change. And on top of that, we're trying to build a community. So I hope to see you in Missouri. We still got room for plenty more people there. You have to be a CPI member or a close friend of CPI to come. Close friends have already gotten an invitation. If you want to join the CPI, it's not too late. We can always use some new members. I hope to see you there. It's going to be a great weekend event. So sign up at cpiusa.org to be a member. You'll get an invitation. If not, then you're going to miss out. Right. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So, we're building a network, we're building a community, and we're also having an event, information to be released soon. It is confirmed we are having this event in early July. I did invite Lori. It's too bad you can't make it. See, Lori, one of our friends, she got an invitation. But we have invited a number of our friends. It's not just CPI members, but if you want to be there, you need to join the CPI. So, it's going to be great. And so I wanted to let you all know about that. I just wanted to let you know where we're all at. There's a lot of things we can talk about. I see people are already asking questions. Thanks for your tip once again, Ted Sawyer. I do appreciate it. Ted Sawyer sent a tip on the Rockfin. And so now we will start calling people out as we see them. We're going to do the roll call, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We're going to do that, and then I'll start answering your super chat questions. So there you go. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? All right, we got Jonathan Mahari in Stockholm, Sweden. Welcome, welcome. We got Cleveland Pirate Alex. Cleveland Pirate Alex is with us. All right, who else? We got Rice from Adelaide, Australia. We got Brendan from Palo Alto, Lori in Tornado Alley, Oklahoma, Chester in England, Lawrence Johnson in Chicago, Heidi in Edinburgh, Scotland, Steve in Boston, Jeff Young in Kentucky. Shout out to you. Lucca in Singapore, Killian in Milwaukee, Chris in Salt Lake City, Edwin in the Philippines, Steve in Boston, Jamie in St. Paul, Patch in Arizona, Patrick in Maine, Panos in Greece, Anthony in Fort Worth, Texas, Klaus in Germany, Dave in New Zealand, Alex from Brazil, Neil Fraser in Hong Kong, Miami, Florida, Phil, Grady in Southern California. Welcome, welcome. We got Briggy in Pennsylvania. Welcome, Briggy. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Adam in Las Vegas, Moonlight Beach, California, Scott, right? You know, there we go. There we go. There we go. Always a pleasure. We got St. David's, Bermuda, Restless Native. Welcome, Restless Native. We got Catalonia, Spain, Paus. We got Micah in Las Vegas. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We got Isaac in Vancouver. Welcome, Isaac. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh, and the Rockfin. We got even more in the Rockfin coming in. Ted Sawyer says, was not the Tea Party a community of disaffection which was co-opted and lured? All right, writing it down. Thank you for the super chat. I'll be answering that, right? Okay. Very good. All right. And that's Ted in England who's asking about the Tea Party. We got Clinton Fraser in London, Anthony in Detroit. Very, very good. All right. So now for the second half of our show, I will be answering people's super chat questions. First super chat question is, did I see the unhinged Cubans yelling at Univision? I did not. I mean, was that in front of the courthouse? Because Univision was there. They're the Spanish language TV network. And there were a lot of Cubans. This is Miami. And it was a Trump thing. And Miami Cubans love Trump. So, yeah, there was plenty of them. Oh, Tristan's in Buenos Aires. Welcome, Tristan. And when you say the storm is coming, what would the giants such as BlackRock, Raytheon with trillions are thinking? Don't they see this? Yeah. There we go. There we go. Oh, Ellie in Chicago. Shout out to Ellie. So yeah, there we go. They were yelling at Jorge Ramos, calling him communist. Yeah, I had my argument with the Miami Cubans. A lot of Miami Cubans there who were saying things like, you know, Biden is just like Daniel Ortega jailing his opposition, stuff like that. That was just, you know, and I argued with them, and you know, it's like they you know, it's kind of contradictory. It's kind of contradictory. Because if you understand that Donald Trump is being persecuted, because I mean, Tucker Carlson, by the way, he did a great segment about how the main thing that they don't like about Donald Trump is what he said about Iraq and weapons of mass destruction and him being anti-war. That is the main thing they have against Trump. They don't really care what he says about immigrants. They don't really care what he says about Muslims. They really don't care about him being rude and nasty to women. What they really can't stand about Donald Trump is that he has questioned the Washington war establishment. And I mean, watch Tucker Carlson. He just kind of lays it out there. Well, that Washington war establishment has been demonizing Cuba for years, has been demonizing Nicaragua and Venezuela. And these Miami Cubans, they're just foot soldiers of the U.S. foreign policy establishment, except they like Trump, who's at odds with it. And it's a contradictory position to be in. And I've pointed that out to them. And they had a hard time, you know, watch the argument I had with those Miami Cubans on my live stream. It was important. I thought it was a great exchange because, you know, look, the people going after Trump are the same people going after Cuba, right? So just because Trump grandstands against Cuba and grandstands against Marxists and stuff, at the end of the day, the people that Trump is standing up to, the Washington establishment, they've been going after Cuba for years. You know, That's really what it gets down to. Cuba supports Russia and Ukraine. They just built a big monument in Russia to Fidel Castro. Now they're spreading lies, claiming that Cuba is about to set up a spy base for China, and they've admitted that was a lie. That was just to build anti-Cuba sentiments. So there you go. Jenny Lynn says, I did a great job with the Miami Cubans. Thank you, Jenny. I do appreciate that. Doing the best I can. All right. Next question. What is the utility of describing things as left-wing and right-wing? Does it confuse people? At this point, yes, it does. It has absolutely no meaning. And people who use that are increasingly using it to stop thinking on both sides, right? When I talk to Trumpers, when I talk to conservatives, you can get them to, they're against the state, they're against the FBI, they're against the CIA. But the second you start talking about economic inequality or whatever, or the Soviet Union, or they say, "Oh my God, that's like left wing, that's like socialist, that's left," and it's just a label, right? And it's this label. You can't think about it because it's left wing, it's socialist, and that's just bad because they're conservatives, right? And on the left now, it's that's what they've been doing for years. They label something right wing. That's right wing. And it's gotten to the point that any anti-establishment idea is now being labeled right-wing, right? I mean, look, I remember when being against vaccines was a left-wing thing, right? It was Dennis Kucinich was critical of vaccines. I remember that. And Jill Stein was critical of vaccines, that it was like the natural medicine people, the hippie naturopath doctor kind of thing. They were the ones that were critical of vaccines. It was leftists, it was hippies, people into natural medicine and people into Buddhism and stuff like that. They were the ones critical of vaccines. But now that big pharma is, a big part of the left-wing establishment, and if you're critical of vaccines, you must be right-wing. There you go. I also remember when being against wars was a left-wing thing. Right? It was the far left that were against invading Iraq. It was the far left that were always questioning U.S. foreign policy. But now, if you question sending weapons to Ukraine, oh my God, you're supporting Putin. That's right wing. Everything is right. Working class, I've been told, working class is a white supremacist code word, I'm told. That was my favorite. You're not allowed to say working class anymore. What is communism all about if it's not about the working class? Well, if you say working class, that's a white supremacist code word. It's just like, neither left wing nor right wing really have any meaning anymore. And the anti-imperialist countries of the world have gotten to be more conservative. You go to Nicaragua, you go to Venezuela, you go to North Korea, you go to China, you go to Vietnam. They're not into that whole gay marriage, transgender thing. They're not. And people try to pretend otherwise, and they are deluding themselves, right? They just aren't, right? And in fact, the communist governments of the world are quite conservative because what they offer is economic stability. They say, we will control the means of production in order to raise living standards. We'll stabilize society. You won't have all the insecurity that comes with capitalism. Meanwhile, the people that want to overthrow the socialist governments, the rich kids who are part of the color revolution apparatus, they all feel, quote unquote, left wing. They're that revolutionary intelligentsia. They want chaos. They want to burn it down. They want to go out and riot. They want to release their libido, their rage at their parents, their rage at society, their sex drive. So it's like the color revolution apparatus is, quote unquote, left wing, the forces supported by U.S. imperialism. The countries that are resisting U.S. imperialism are, quote unquote, right wing, in that they're not super on board with, social liberalism and stuff, and that they promote stability. And, we're in this weird period where left wing and right wing don't really have any meaning. Now, if you want to get technical, the origin of the term left and right, it goes back to the French Revolution. After the king was overthrown, they set up a national assembly. The people that were loyal to the king sat on the right. The people that were more in favor of overthrowing the king, they sat on the left. That's the origin of the terms, right? And so the left were defined as wanting historical progress. The right were defined as being more traditional and conservative. That's all that it means, right? And we're in a period where a lot of the ideas that are put out by the so-called left are against historical progress. I mean, degrowth, the idea that economic growth is bad, technology is bad, human population expansion is bad. These are all right-wing ideas. That's Malthusianism is right-wing, primitivism, that's Julius Evola. You want to go back to the primitive traditional ways. You think modern society is hierarchical. Julius Evola talked about the demonic nature of the economy. This is all right-wing. Go and read, Keith Preston. He wrote a book called Thinkers Against Modernity. Go and read Thinkers Against Modernity. You'll find a lot of ideas in that book associated with people like Julius Evola, Ernst Juncker, and Oswald Spengler, and these are far right ideas that are now considered left wing. Meanwhile, that like I just listed, opposing wars, opposing the FBI, opposing the police state, these all things used to be left wing. Now they're labeled right wing. It doesn't have any meaning anymore. We're not in the political period that we're in. And some of the most cringe stuff you can watch from the mainstream, Dinesh D'Souza. I cannot stand Dinesh D'Souza. I know he's taken some stances around Trump and all that, but I just can't stand him because he doesn't teach his audience anything. He just peddles political ignorance. He does documentaries about how like the Democrats believe in slavery. The Democrats were pro-slavery because they're Marxists and Marxism is left-wing. And it's like Karl Marx was a heroic abolitionist and opponent of slavery. It's like, and it's just like, he doesn't try to get his audience to think any deeper about politics. He just panders to their ignorance, right? And says awful things, The Nazis considered themselves to be right-wing. They did. They considered themselves to be a party of the right. They hated communists and leftists. But did they believe in capitalism? No, they promoted a right-wing critique of anti-capitalism. Right-wing anti-capitalism exists. But according to Dinesh D'Souza, anyone who criticizes capitalism is a leftist. Well, that's not true historically. The Catholic Church was against capitalism as it was getting started from a conservative perspective, right? That right-wing anti-capitalism has been around for a long time. Oswald Spengler, Ernst Juncker, there's Julius Evola. There's a whole anti-capitalist right-wing. Right-wing anti-capitalism was very common, at least until World War II. And around the world, you go to Europe, a lot of the right-wing don't believe in, they have like a traditionalist authoritarian critique of capitalism. The traditionalist Catholics, right? They have their critique of capitalism. Michael Jones is against capitalism. Right? He's very right-wing, very anti-Semitic, but he's against capitalism. And he wrote a whole book opposing capitalism at the time of Occupy Wall Street. Barren Metal, the history of the struggle between labor and usury or something like that. It's like, the idea that the right wing, they all are Reagan Republicans from the 1980s. And anyone who's not that is by de facto left wing. That's basically all of Dinesh D'Souza's work banks on that delusion. And politics is not that simple. And it's just this very, very childish, very simplistic way of understanding it. It drives me up the wall, honestly. But that shows how meaningless left and right really are. Because, according to him, everyone who's bad is left wing because they're left wing and they're bad. And all things that are good are right wing. What does that mean? Right? It loses any meaning at any point, right? I read it. There was an Ann Coulter book. I'll never forget this. Book by Ann Coulter, where she was making fun of people who thought that Barack Obama might be assassinated, right? That there were a lot of liberals who were afraid Obama would be assassinated, the first black president. And so she was making fun of this in her book. And so she started going over how every presidential assassin, she argued, had been left-wing. And she argued that John Wilkes Booth, the guy who shot Abraham Lincoln, was left-wing. Okay? And I was just like, how can she be saying this? And she said, John Wilkes Booth was a famous actor and an anti-war activist. He was basically the Sean Penn of the 1860s. And I'm just like, that is the stupidest thing I ever... Anti-war, meaning he wasn't anti-war. He supported the South. He was on the South side. And the South wanted to maintain slavery, which was the conservative position. Right? And Abraham Lincoln was supported by Karl Marx, who was using the federal government. But I guess it has no meaning, right? If politics is just Democrats bad, left-wing bad, right-wing good, It's that kind of simplistic politics. Well, I mean, so it's starting to not have any meaning. The question is, what are you for? What are you for? Where do you stand? You want to free Assange? You want to stop the charges against the Uhuru movement? You want to stop the wars? What do you think of our 4-point economic plan? What are you for? What are you against? Right? And ideology and all of that, again, it's important, but that kind of thing is for people that are already in your group. It's not for the masses, right? Going up to people and saying we are left wing, going up to people and saying we are right wing is starting to be a waste of your time, right? Go up to people and say this is what we're for and this is what we're against. Hope that answered your question well, Tom. Cornel West running on the Green Party ticket now. Yeah, I saw that. And, I don't want to say too much about it, honestly. I love the People's Party. Let me just say this. CPI, we don't endorse any party in elections. We do not campaign for any candidate. But Nick Brana is our friend. And the People's Party did a great rally, the Rage Against the War Machine. We were official sponsors of that very important anti-war rally. And Nick Brana is our friend. And I don't know what's going on with Cornel West. And, I have thoughts. I have thoughts on it. But I just want to share this all with you. One of the things that people said made Stalin so powerful was that he was strategically silent. There were times where Stalin's enemies would expect him to speak up and he wouldn't say anything. And that you want to be careful with stuff like this. I see what's happening. And I can tell you that CPI, even though we don't endorse any candidates or any parties, Nick Brana and the People's Party are our friends. There is a friendship, a deep friendship between the People's Party and Nick Brana. We are proud to have had Nick Brana come to our events, and we love the People's Party. That's all we're saying right now. Because honestly, I don't really know what's going on. I've heard some different things. There's some stuff that has trickled back to me. But I don't know how this is going to end up. I don't know what the ultimate result of this is going to be. I've seen the new development about the Green Party and Cornel West and all this, but I don't know where this is headed. And I don't want to jump the gun. Right? So, we have a very good relationship with the People's Party, with Nick Brana, even though we don't endorse any candidate. And, I see different stuff but we're not going to jump the gun. And that's what I would urge people to do. I mean, everyone has their freedom of speech, right? CPI, we don't do the democratic centralism thing that communist groups do, where you're required to speak the party line on your social media or else you get expelled. We don't do that. Our members, there's a lot of different members of CPI with a lot of different opinions about all kinds of things. So CPI members are free to say what they want. But as an organization, and as Caleb, myself, other than telling you that we love Nick Brana and that he's our friend and that we stand by him and we are friendly with the People's Party, other than that, I'm not saying anything more about it because I don't know what the ultimate result of this is going to be. I really don't know. I do not know what the ultimate result is going to be. I have different feelings. There are different things that I've been shown over the last few days about Cornel West and the Green Party and the People's Party, et cetera. Certain things that have been said and certain things that have not been publicly said that have trickled back to me. And I have a certain feeling about those things, but I'm sitting on it right now. And I would urge you to do the same. Wait to see how this plays out. Don't jump the gun. And that's what I would urge you to do, right? That if you jump the gun, sometimes you can get things wrong. Sometimes things look one way and then they morph into something completely different. Yeah. I heard about it. I haven't watched the interview yet, but I heard about it, Kiwi, right? Right? I heard that as well, Joe. And again, I'm just sitting on it. And that's what I would urge you to do as well. Sometimes the best thing you can do in life is just wait, right? Sometimes you just have to wait on things because if you jump the gun, and that's the problem with social media, is social media wants you to jump the gun. It wants you to, rah, and so then people, rah, and then you can't back down because no one can ever admit they're wrong on social media, right? And if you come out swinging, with a position, right? And you do that too soon, you may make people angry. Things may start out one way and develop into something completely different, and you just painted yourself into a corner. And I've done that before. There have been times that I jumped the gun. I spoke on something too soon, and I alienated people, and I painted myself into a corner. Honestly, I in 2016, I wrote an article attacking Bernie Sanders, right? And honestly, I shouldn't have done that. The reason I wrote the article was because I was angry that there was so much interest in socialism, and the socialist group I was a member of at the time, but in the process of leaving, was not preaching socialism, was instead just trying to lead protests. And I was really angry to see Bernie Sanders being the voice of socialism on American television. So I wrote this article attacking Bernie Sanders, calling him a sewer socialist, and it was, everything I wrote was true. And we saw that Bernie Sanders' campaign didn't lead anywhere good. But honestly, that was not strategic, because the Bernie Sanders movement, everybody, it seems, all the good folks that I know now came out of the Sanders campaign. The Convo Couch, Fiorella, and Pasta, they started with the Sanders campaign. Jimmy Dore, Sanders campaign, right? There's so many good people that came out of the Sanders movement, and yeah, Sanders ended up selling out his movement, right? And forced the vote. And, there's no reason to defend Bernie, right? We can all admit that Bernie, is now, he's very pro-war. He has his flaws. We know what's happened with Nick Brana, and Nick Brana ended up leaving, the Bernie Sanders campaign and starting the People's Party. But, sometimes you don't want to jump the gun. John McCarthy says left Twitter would always dump on Tulsi for waiting for facts before she commented on something. Right. And, the attacks on Tulsi Gabbard are always, it's very interesting, because they never attack her on what it's really about, right? They would find things that she has said, things that are just kind of what normal politicians say, and they attack her on them. The real reason they don't like Tulsi is because of the good things about her, right? Now, I am going to be on with Jose Vega tomorrow night. I'm going to be on his stream. Jose Vega is awesome, by the way. And I'm going to be on his stream tomorrow night. So he's started a new show, and I'm going to be on it. So as soon as I have a link, I'll drop the link. Maybe he sent me the link already. But that's what I'm doing tomorrow night, 9:15. It'll be me and Jose. And that's going to be pretty cool. And I'm very excited about it. It's going to be pretty awesome. So I'm really looking forward to being on with Jose Vega. Jose Vega is a great guy, and I'm really looking forward to it. So that's going to be pretty cool. So there's that. But there you go. I got some more super chats to answer. What is Lysenkoism? Okay, so what is this? Has any anti-imperialist government ever said anything explicitly about the work of Susan Sontag and the Congress for Cultural Freedom? So Lysenkoism, right? There was a biologist in the Soviet Union, Lysenko, and look, I am not a biologist, okay, but the understanding is that Lysenko developed some theories about the inheritance of acquired traits, right? So Darwinian evolution argues that you have genes, and that every person is unique, right? No person is a copy of another person. Again, there's probably a biologist watching who's like cringing now. I'm doing this so badly, but this is the way I understand this as a non-biologist. Every person is unique because of something called genetic mutations, right? That no two people are exactly alike because, you get your genes from your parents, but you mutate a little bit. And these are called genetic mutations. And that then, new diseases come, new germs come, conditions of society change, and then some genes, genetic mutations get passed on, and some people die and they don't reproduce. And that this is the process through which change comes, is that genetic mutations create a situation that leads to natural selection that then leads to some traits being passed on and some traits not being passed on, right? But that is what Darwin taught about evolution. There was another biologist prior to Darwin who came up with a concept called, his name was Lamarck. And Lamarck believed in the inheritance of acquired traits. The example is that, if every time, you have a group of mice, and after the mice are born, you cut their tails off, and then they breed with other mice. Those mice have babies. You take those mice that are born and you cut their tails off, and then they go and they breed with other mice, and those mice that are born, you cut their tails off. Pretty soon, you're gonna have mice born with no tails. That's Lamarckian evolution, the inheritance of acquired traits. And standard biology rejects Lamarckian evolution and instead favors Darwinian evolution, which is the inheritance of genetics through the process of genetic mutations. So my understanding, again, not a biologist, I'm just explaining to you how it has been explained to me. And I'm not a biologist, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not taking a position on this either. I'm just telling you the way I understand this argument is that in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, there was a biologist named Lysenko who argued that Darwin was not completely right and that there was some truth in Lamarckian evolution, the inheritance of acquired traits. He argued that the society we're born in can change our genes, and that the genes that we pass on are not just the genes that we're born with. And he argued this, and in order to defend himself, he argued that his biology was more in line with Marxism, Leninism, and dialectical and historical materialism. And because his theories of biology were considered to be more in line with Marxism, Leninism, they got promoted by the Soviet state. So many people have criticized that and pointed to that. That's just a standard anti-communist talking point, is that the communists don't believe in science. They want to force their ideology onto science because in the 1930s, this guy Lysenko came up with some theories of biology that were not correct, but were in line with dialectical and historical materialism. And so because of that, the Soviet government promoted them, and that shows that the Soviet communists are totalitarian and they're meddling in the sciences, and communism is bad. Right? And there's a lot of that. It's annoying, but it's like, every field. Jyoti Brar gave a great speech about this. No matter what you study music in the United States, you study athletics in the United States. They always find a way to slip anti-communist propaganda in there, right? In every conceivable way, right? Now, I know nothing about biology, but I will say this, right? First of all, there are some new studies where people are talking about the possibility of your genes changing because of trauma and stuff like that. I know nothing about it. It could be all malarkey, but I understand there is some reopening of some of these Lysenko Lamarckian acquired traits, genes changing over time. There is some new debate about that. I understand, first of all. So that's the first thing, right? As I understand, recently there have been people reopening this question. I know nothing about it. Second of all, right, is it possible that the Soviet government, because it had a confirmation bias, because it wanted to promote things that it thought was in line with communism, promoted some theories or teachings in science that they thought were more in line with communism, and they were not correct? Is that possible? Absolutely. Sure. That's called the confirmation bias. Human beings do that, right? You're more likely to believe something that's in line with what you already believe, right? That's how human beings work. Human beings have a confirmation bias. And it is ridiculously unfair to point to that in the Soviet Union as, oh, communism bad because there's this one instance, we found one place where one scientist got promoted. How many examples of that can you find in capitalist society? Eugenics, right? Racial pseudoscience was all the rage at the height of capitalism, the Gilded Age that all the libertarians like, the age of Carnegie, the age of Rockefeller, the age of the great industrialists. That was when all the scientists in America were churning out all kinds of racist pseudoscience to justify the oppression of black people. Does that prove capitalism's bad? Right? For years. I mean, they actually had a mental illness. Psychology is the worst. They actually had a mental illness for a slave who wanted to be free. They actually had a name for a mental illness of a kind of insanity where a slave just doesn't want to be a slave anymore. He must be crazy because everyone knows slavery is good. Right? Michael Parenti wrote a very good book called The Culture Struggle where he shows this. There are many instances of science in capitalist society being corrupted. Right? Many, many, many examples. Right? I mean, for years. Right? I mean, there have been all kinds of, racial pseudoscience was promoted by Western capitalism to justify the oppression of black people. Gender stuff. There was all kinds of, where does the term, what's the term that they use for a nymphomaniac? That was a mental illness for a woman who wasn't sexually satisfied by her husband. She wanted to have more than one partner. She was not sexually satisfied in her marriage. She was a nymphomaniac because everyone knows women should only sleep with their husbands. Right? There's many examples of this. The cigarettes, right? Tobacco companies worked really, really hard to suppress the fact that cigarettes cause cancer. I mean, there's so many examples of Western capitalism corrupting the sciences. Many, many, many examples of this. Many, 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 many examples of this in biology and psychology. Many examples of this. Many, 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 many examples. Many, many, many examples of the sciences being corrupted by the capitalist who pays for the research or provides the funding. So many examples of this. That when people sit there and go, oh, well, there was this one guy in the Soviet Union named Lysenko, and it drives me crazy. And it's like the only reason anyone knows this guy's name is because this is proof the communists, they corrupted the sciences. Maybe they did. Maybe that's true. Maybe Lysenko was full of shit, and the Soviet government mistakenly promoted him because it fulfilled their political agenda. And if that is the case, that's wrong. I do not know. I see people in the chat defend Lysenko. I know that the Harpal Brar and the CPGBML, they have written articles defending Lysenko. I know absolutely nothing about it. Okay. And I trust me, I know nothing about it. Absolutely nothing about it. I don't take a position. And even what I just explained to you is probably a really surface level understanding, right? That's the way it's been explained to me as a non-biologist. I really know nothing about it. And of course, I'm against government imposing a political agenda onto science, right? I'm against that. But to blame that on communism and to say therefore communism is inherently bad it's like, you know, the pot calling the kettle black, if ever. I mean, it is just utterly ridiculous. So yeah, there you go. Look, there are, and this, you know, again, the global communist movement, right? Western communists, Western communists, you know, they don't even believe in Marxism anymore. They study Judith Butler, and they're, you know, going to college and getting their degree in gender studies or whatever. Right. But, you know, the global communist movement, like around the world, people who believe in Marxism, Leninism, the kind of people who go to the World Communist Youth Festivals in China, where communism is the ruling ideology, Vietnam, you know, India, for example, right? You know, we have Kerala, which is a whole province that's run by the Communist Party of Marxists, and you know, you have many African countries where, you know, maybe, you know, the whole country won its independence through the leadership of communists, like Angola and Namibia, countries like that, right? There's a huge global communist movement, South America, etc. Right? Among like the real global communist movement, there are some views on scientific matters that go against the prevailing view in the scientific community. And as a non-scientist, I have no opinion of them. The two that I am the most familiar with, that I have met people, and I have friends who swear by both of these, who are very firm adherents. The two most common non-mainstream scientific views among communists globally that I'm aware of are, number one, rejection of the new physics. Right? Dr. Eric Lerner wrote a book, and he went to Columbia University. He's the head of the fusion energy research in New Jersey. He wrote a book that has been translated into many languages that many communists around the world love, called The Big Bang Never Happened. Go read it for yourself. I mean, I know nothing. You know, it's called The Big Bang Never Happened by Eric Lerner. Right? And he basically argues, and he's got a Wikipedia page. He's the head of the fusion energy research in New Jersey, which is not an easy job to get. He's a well-known physicist, and he wrote this book in 1991, The Big Bang Never Happened. And he maintains that what they call the new physics is bullshit. And he's a communist. He's a Marxist. His work, communists in India and communists in Africa, and there's communists in China who really respect this guy. And he maintains that, you know, quantum physics and all of that is bullshit. Right? And yeah, he maintains that, you know, and there's someone else I respect, a guy named Mike Gimbel. Mike Gimbel, who was a Workers' World Party member, was a sports statistician, is a brilliant man, a brilliant writer, a brilliant speaker. He wrote a book himself. He also takes this position, right? And he has done a lot of research, and he maintains that, you know, he wrote this book, Dialectical Materialism versus the New Physics by Mike Gimbel, right? And he wrote this book, you know, basically making the same arguments, and his book is endorsed. I see on it's endorsed by Glenn Borchardt, PhD of the Progressive Science Institute, endorses it, right? I mean, you know, he's got quite a bit of, Mike is if you look at his career as a sports statistician, he's not just some bum on the street. Like he has some credentials in that area. So that's the first big non-mainstream view, that around the world, there are a lot of communists who reject the new physics, right? I wouldn't say it's a majority of communists in the world that do this, but there is a large number of communists who maintain that the new physics is bunk, right? And it's interesting because the LaRouche people also, Eric Lerner was with the LaRouche people back when they called themselves Marxists, and then he broke away from them. He's no longer affiliated with them. He had a falling out with them years ago. But the LaRouche people also reject the new physics. They reject the second law of thermodynamics. They don't believe in entropy, etc. So the LaRouche people also reject the new physics, and that's kind of interesting. And that's yet another example of them being more in tune with the global communist movement than Western communists are. But, you know, I wouldn't say it's a majority. I'd say probably the majority of communists in the world accept the new physics, but there is a minority, I would say, a very serious, very ideological, very interested in physics communists who reject the new physics, who say the Big Bang never happened, who say, you know, and they hold on to, like Tyler, give me that old time physics. They hold on to classical physics. And there's actually a book that Lenin wrote, right? What is it? Empiro-criticism. Lenin wrote a book, Materialism and Empiro-criticism, about physics, right? Where he argued for some of this stuff. And that they tend to cite this book by Lenin, because I guess in the Bolshevik Party, there was a group of people who didn't believe in dialectical materialism, but instead were embracing some kind of religious or spiritual practice and were arguing based on physics that it was true. So Lenin wrote a book in 1909 called Materialism and Empiro-criticism. And they tend to, the people that reject the new physics tend to heavily cite this book, Materialism and Empiro-criticism. I can't make heads or tails of the book. And this is one of those things that I just don't care enough about. I know I'm not a classic dialectical materialist. I do believe in God, right? I do believe in spiritual power. I am not a pure materialist. I don't just believe that thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. I will never be that. Even when I thought I was, I still didn't think that way. I very much believe in spiritual power and such. And I believe in the ability of the will and human ability. And, you know, I am not an economic determinist, right? So, you know, in a lot of ways, I would be the last person to line up with this. But that's one. The second big straying from the mainstream of the scientific community that I've heard from communists around the world, this is very big among communists in Africa, is what they tend to call AIDS denial, right? Which is not fair, because they're not denying that people have a disease. They're not, but people who argue that HIV and the way we talk about AIDS is not consistent with scientific reality, right? And this is very big as well. That they argue that the outbreak of AIDS in African countries is more related to these countries not having adequate and modern infrastructure and sewage systems than it is related to unprotected sex. And that the way we talk about HIV and AIDS in the United States, you know, the standard way we discuss AIDS is not scientifically correct. And that is something, again, do I take a position on this? No, right? I have no idea. I mean, obviously use condoms if you don't want to get AIDS. You know, I mean, you know, I assume everything we're told about AIDS is true, but there are some communists, right? There are some communists, and there are some Africans, and there are some anti-imperialists around the world who maintain that the way we talk about AIDS is bull honking, right? And I actually understand that RFK also is into some of this, and that his book on Dr. Fauci, I remember when I read it, it has some of this stuff in it. His book, you know, the real Dr. Fauci, RFK's book, actually gets into some of this as well. That the way we understand AIDS in the West is not exactly right. And that, like, you know, they look at, you know, these African countries where they had huge explosions of AIDS. What, do people just not have unprotected sex in these African countries? Oh, it's just, you know, I mean, there's something more going on, right? That it's about a lot more than just, you know, oh, AIDS is a disease you get from having unprotected sex. You know, and you know, that's generally the way, you know, that we talk about AIDS in the West, right? Is that AIDS is people who have unprotected sex, you know, end of story. And that apparently there are a number of communists who say there's more to it than that, and it's more related to a lack of economic development. It's related to a lack of sanitary conditions in countries. It's related to these countries being kept in chronic poverty. It's related to neoliberalism, and I mean, and again, look, when AIDS first started, when the AIDS crisis began, you'll remember that, the Soviet Union largely believed it was some kind of CIA government operation. Iraq, the government of Iraq also believed it was some kind of CIA government operation. And also, the Workers' World Party also believed it was some kind of CIA government operation. Now, they probably don't think that now, but Leslie Feinberg was leader of the Workers' World Party, considered the first transgender activist in American history. Leslie Feinberg wrote articles for Workers' World newspapers saying that AIDS was a U.S. government conspiracy. And that was something a lot of gay activists believed. And that was also something that a lot of Soviet-aligned people believed. And also, at the time that the AIDS virus was really getting going, people did not really know how it was transmitted. And Cuba, you'll remember, quarantined everyone with AIDS. Every person with HIV in Cuba was quarantined because they were afraid that it would spread in ways other than people having sex with each other. They were afraid, and that people didn't know what was going on with AIDS. And that that there are certain things that people that are critical of the AIDS narrative, like RFK, will point out, right? And they will point to certain things. I'm not going to get into too much detail about that on this stream because, first of all, I don't endorse this stuff. I have no way of knowing, number one. And number two, they probably think it's medical disinformation or something. I might get in trouble here on YouTube. I'm not promoting any of these ideas. I'm just telling you that they're out there. Along with the physics stuff, there's also people who question AIDS. Right. And those are the two scientific disagreements among communists that I am the most familiar with. You asked me about Lysenkoism and all of that. So those are worth mentioning. And I think, people should know that those ideas are out there. And if you're really interested in scientists, if there's somebody in the CPI community who's really into biology and science, go and research this. Go and research Lysenko. Go and research the AIDS thing and come back to me and give me your opinion because you know way better than I. Or someone in the CPI community is really into physics, go and read Eric Lerner and go and read critics of his work. Go and read Mike Gimbel and come back to me and tell me what you think because I have no idea. I just have no idea. All right. Next super chat. Is it not a fact that Margaret Thatcher and her advisors and successors have understood the challenge of Marxism and developed the technological and psychological and medical instruments to better control the masses? I don't know. I mean, the rise of Margaret Thatcher, that was in the 1970s. The rise of Margaret Thatcher, you had Margaret Thatcher came along and her main thing was to fight the labor unions. The labor unions in Britain had a lot of power. Arthur Scargill and the coal miners unions were very radical. 1972, I was just reading today about the famous Battle of Saltley Gate. That was in the United Kingdom. Where, the miners went on strike demanding a 35% raise, which that's quite a big raise. They demanded a 35% raise and they got it because there was so much solidarity from other labor unions and they blocked the gates of the plants. It was called the Battle of Saltley Gate and they won. And Arthur Scargill, the leader of the coal miners union in Britain, the National Union of Miners, the NUM, was a communist who admired Stalin. He was friends with Gaddafi. And, Arthur Scargill was a militant. And so Margaret Thatcher came into office. She was going to break the miners' union. And the miners' strike of 1984 was a very intense battle. People died on the picket line. 1984 in Britain, you had a real battle. And Margaret Thatcher came into office. She was going to fight the labor unions and she was going to roll back the welfare state. Now, she didn't get rid of free college. She didn't get rid of free healthcare. She did privatize, I think, was railway privatized or is railway still nationalized in Britain? But she rolled back the welfare state significantly. The big quote from Margaret Thatcher that they often refer to is she said, "There is no such thing as society. There's only individuals." That's the quote that people use. There's no such thing as society. Meaning, and that's anti-collectivism, right? That's radical individualism. There is no such thing as society. There's only individuals. That was Margaret Thatcher's ideology, kind of. That was her radical liberalism. So that was Margaret Thatcher, right? And she was American politics and British politics are very similar. Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, right? Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan come in at the same time with kind of the same message: roll back the welfare state, the right wing in revival against the upsurge of the 60s. Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. Tony Blair started New Labor, which was an attempt to take the Labor Party to the right as the Soviet Union was declining. And Bill Clinton, he started the Democrat National Committee, the Democrat, what was it called? It was the Democrat Leadership Committee, the DLC. And it was the same thing. It was just like New Labor, except for the Democratic Party. Take the Democratic Party to the right, argue that, class struggle is outdated. Tony Blair and Bill Clinton were very similar. Boris Johnson and Trump were very similar. Brexit and the Trump movement in the United States. British politics and American politics are very closely tied in with each other. Very, very closely tied in with each other. They tend to parallel each other. Tony Blair was a Democrat, or was it Labor, right? He was a Labor guy. And George W. Bush was a Republican, but they both did the war in Iraq, and they both promoted the same lies about weapons of mass destruction. It's worth paying attention to, right? American politics and British politics line up very closely. Our ruling classes are very closely linked. There's that book, The Anglo-American Establishment by Carol Quigley, that I often reference. So there you go. Did you see Trump's post-court speech? I did. I did see different lines of it. Trump is fighting for his people. I mean, Trump is very much, he's got a base of support, and he's white knuckling it. And you can be sure they've sat down with him and said, these charges will go away, buddy, if you'll drop out of the race. But is he dropping out? No, he's Trump. I'm curious how this is going to end up, right? Are they actually going to throw Trump in jail? Is Trump going to run for office from jail? Is this going to happen? I'm curious where does this go? I mean, what's the end game of this? I don't see Trump ever backing down, right? Trump wouldn't do that. Let his supporters down, right? That would be, if Trump did that, that would be the end of Trump, first of all, but it would be a sad day, right? All right. All right. It would be a sad day. And I don't see Trump backing down. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening at all. All right. Was the Tea Party a community of disaffection, which was co-opted and lured under the banner of the alt-right by the Koch brothers, says Ted in England? Well, it's much more complicated than that. Right, Ted? I mean, you're right. The Tea Party was kind of an upsurge in response to the economic crisis, and it was largely libertarian when it started. It was part of the Ron Paul movement, right? It was people, the 2008. There'd been many Republicans who were disaffected by Bush, were against the war in Iraq, and so they voted for Ron Paul, the conservative. And there was a lot of internet support for Ron Paul. And so after the election of Barack Obama, they began protesting against taxation and against big government and having kind of libertarian protests. And then Fox News jumped in and made it a general revolt against Obama for being a communist who's soft on the Muslims, blah, 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 blah. Right. Now you said the alt-right. Well, the alt-right that's a completely different thing. The alt-right is a particular brand started by Richard Spencer. And they believe they're white racists. I mean, they believe they're fighting for white people. They believe in they're white nationalists, white supremacists, white racists, whatever you want to call them. That's what they are. They're racial identitarians. They are explicitly arguing that there is something inherently different about non-Jewish white people, that non-Jewish white people should have their own homeland. Yeah, they're a fringe movement of dangerous extremists that are historically tied to the Ku Klux Klan, and they're not good folks. All right, they're not good folks. And they are, they call themselves. They have different euphemisms they use for themselves, but alt-right in particular refers to white nationalism or white supremacism or white separatism or whatever you want to call it. But and What drives me crazy is that, like, that exists. That absolutely exists. White nationalism, white supremacism, whatever you want to call it, that exists. There are some very, very specific beliefs those people have. One, they hate Jews. They are very open about hating Jews. They believe there's some kind of Jewish conspiracy against white people. Number two, they want racial separatism. They want a whites only territory. That's what they believe, right? That is what they believe. Now there are many people that are right wing and racist that don't believe that, right? There's many white Americans who think police brutality isn't real, who think police brutality is made up, that, they have an uncle who's a cop or a cousin who's a cop, and they know that there's no such thing as police brutality, that think, all the black people. I mean, I don't have to repeat every racist thing that's ever been said. There's a lot of racist white people who are not part of that movement, right? There's a lot of racist white people that are just racist. They don't want a separate white homeland. They don't hate Jews. They just hate black people, right? I mean, that particular movement, the alt-right, that is Richard Spencer's brand, right? That was an attempt to kind of reinvent the politics of David Duke, right? The politics of David Duke, the politics of the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazi groups, to kind of morph that and bring it into the 21st century, right? They're anti-Semitic white separatists, right? A lot of them are neo-Nazis. A lot of them, they justify it in many different ways. There's many different interpretations. But at the end of the day, people that are white separatists and anti-Semites, right? This particular brand is a very small group of people. But when Donald Trump got elected, mainstream media really blew them up because they were the boogeyman, because they scared, because they did like Trump and they did support Donald Trump. And so it was very useful to use them. Hillary Clinton gave a whole speech about them, and they were this, oh my God, be afraid of Trump because of these people. Well, I debated one of them, Augustus Sol Invictus. It was a weird night. You can watch, and Julian Assange tweeted out our debate. He was so impressed with our debate, he tweeted it out. You can watch the video of our debate. I had a debate with Augustus Sol Invictus, but the amount of people that are in that category of people that believe they want a separate white territory, they want a whites only territory, that think there's a Jewish plot against the white people or something like that. I mean, we're talking like 1% of 1% of the population. This is a very, very, very small group of people. Okay. If you're concerned about racism in America, it's a much bigger problem than these guys, right? Racism is a widespread problem, but there is this, and I see this all the time. Anybody who is at all right wing or disagrees with anyone gets accused of being a white nationalist. And it's like, no, white nationalism and the alt-right is a very, very specific group of people. And it's very small, right? It is very, very, very small. Steve Bannon is not part of this group. Steve Bannon is probably racist, but Steve Bannon is not part of the alt-right. He does not want a white homeland. He does not think there's a Jewish plot against white people. There's many, many people that are right-wing, that are racist, that are authoritarian, that are Trump supporters that are not part of this group, right? And it is the biggest meme on the internet. This is why I hate ContraPoints. ContraPoints, she got her big boost. Her career as the big social media influencer was promoting this theory that anyone on the internet who says anything that the left doesn't approve of is secretly giving white nationalist code signs, right? There's this secret Nazi conspiracy within the government, within the media, and that, that everyone you disagree with, anyone who says anything that the wokes don't like, is secretly part of this Nazi cabal that's infiltrated the government. It is one of the stupidest theories I've ever heard, and it never applies to Joe Biden, right? I have had so many people attack me and claim that I am secretly a white nationalist, right? I am not a white nationalist in any conceivable way. I have nothing to do with those politics. But people are like, oh, he uses American flags. Everyone knows flags are patriotic, and patriotic is nationalism, white nationalism. I swear, and there's so many people that learn their politics from this cringe bread tube crap. And it's like they sit there and anyone they disagree with, they start playing this game in their mind of how can I twist what they believe into being white nationalism. It's absolutely infuriating. It is absolutely infuriating. And there are some of these white nationalists that take anti-imperialist positions, that support Russia and Ukraine, that support Syria. And because of that, everyone who takes those positions must be a neo-Nazi. I mean, I guess now we have to support Israel because David Duke didn't support Israel. He's anti-Semitic. I mean, it's this thing where it's like we try, and this is the big trend. I mean, it's starting to fade, but among wokes for a long time, what they thought was politics was anyone who disagrees with you on anything. Anyone who disagrees with you on anything, you then try to reinterpret their hand gestures or something they said or blah, 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 right? And they try to reinterpret it some way to mean that you are secretly part of white nationalism. Even this tweet, like this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. So 1 in 10 people said it's acceptable to hold neo-Nazi views, right? So now he's trying to say 10% is more than 33 million. Hans, right? Right? So the question was not, do you hold neo-Nazi views? 1 in 10 people said it's acceptable to hold Nazi views. You have to understand, Hans, that 1 in 10 people took this survey and said it's acceptable to have those views in the context of American politics where every Trump supporter is being called a neo-Nazi, Hans, right? So in our politics right now, if you get on the internet, if you engage with other Americans, liberals think that every single Trump supporter is a neo-Nazi. And so in that context, 1 out of 10 Americans is going to say, oh, I think you're allowed. What's wrong with being a neo-Nazi? And that doesn't mean they're a neo-Nazi, right? Right? Hans, you don't know what you're talking about, right? I assume your name is Hans because you're in Germany, Hans, but you don't know what you're talking about, right? I'm telling you that in the context of American discourse in which Hillary Clinton called all Trump supporters a basket of deplorables and accused all Trump supporters of being white supremacists, in that context, if you go around and knock on people's doors, there's going to be a significant number of Trump supporters that'll say, yeah, the liberals call me that, and what's wrong with that? But they're not actually part of this group, right? They don't actually go to Richard Spencer meetups. They don't actually want a separate white homeland. They don't think that the Jews are a big cabal that's trying to kill the white people, right? And Hans, I'm telling you, this is the cringe I'm talking about, right? 1 in 10 people are in denial. Maybe, but 1 in 10 people are not neo-Nazis, Hans. I'm telling you, and this is infuriating, right? This is the kind of cringe. Like, people want to believe this. It's much easier to oppose a vast secret Nazi plot within the American government. You can be on Joe Biden's side, you can be on MSNBC's side, and you don't have to question the wars, and you don't have to appeal to people on an economic basis, right? And Joe Biden can be on your side, but I'm telling you, I mean, you have, if you've been to America, 1 in 10 Americans is not a white nationalist. That's just not true. Is 1 in 10 Americans racist? Sure. Yeah, that's definitely true. Probably more than that. Probably way more than that. But Hans, like I'm telling you, the actual ideological white nationalist movement is tiny. And it has collapsed since Charlottesville, right? I mean, it is completely collapsed. It's dead in the water, Hans. Hans, drinking Bud Light doesn't make you yeah. So any books on African communist leaders? Plenty. But this is, and it's triggering people with that, right? Triggering people with this kind of delusional rhetoric, right? Hans is literally trying to tell you that 1 in 10 Americans is Sig Heiling and bowing before a picture of Hitler every morning. And he says this because they took a survey where they asked people, is it acceptable to have neo-Nazi views, in the context of social media calling every Trump supporter a neo-Nazi. 1 out of 10 people said, yes, it is. Triggered the libs and said that. That's not what that means, Hans. I'm telling you, I know there are actual neo-Nazis. You know, they've done polls that show 10% of America believe in communism now. In fact, there's polls that say like 50% of people in America say socialism is better than capitalism, and like 12% say communism is better. Are 10% of Americans active communists who are in communist organizations? Is the Workers' World Party going to get 10% in the election next time, Hans? I mean, come on, right? And it's like you're trying to scare people, and this is the same kind of scare porn, right? You know, how do you think a person of color feels when they hear that 1 in 10 Americans is a neo-Nazi? They're fearing about the safety of their kids and all of that. What you're doing there, Hans, is very evil. That's very evil what you're doing there, right? It's very evil what you're doing there. You're trying to scare people and trigger people into supporting Joe Biden. It's very, very, very evil what you're doing, Hans, right? You are trying to set the stage. You're messing with people's trauma and their fear. And by doing that, by pointing to a statistic that says 1 in 10 people said something might be acceptable, to tell us that 1 out of 10 Americans has white sheets on their head, shame on you, right? And this is the kind, this is the kind of brainwashing that social media does to people, right? And this is how you get people to lose their minds, and this is what causes political violence. You are a liar, Hans. You're a liar, right? When you pointed to a poll, it said 1 in 10 people said something might be acceptable in the context of half the country being called that every day. And you tried to use that to tell me that 1 in 10 people that I see on the street is a violent, person who's about to go commit hate crimes. I mean, you know what a nasty, evil thing that is? Are you trying to destroy America? Right? Because, make people terrified to go outside. You wonder why there's so much tension and fear right now. You wonder why the country's falling apart, right? There's all this propaganda, all this stuff we hear about, Russian disinformation. This is toxic disinformation. This is toxic, evil disinformation. White nationalists are a fringe minority. Yeah, I'm hysterical. You just told me 1 in 10 Americans wants to murder all people of color, right? I mean, you think I'm hysterical. I'm hysterical, right? This is so ridiculous. Hans, you took one statistic and you turned it into something it's completely not, because you want to trigger people of color. You want to make people afraid for their own safety so they'll vote for Joe Biden, right? That is despicable. You know why Julian Assange is rotting in a prison right now? It's because of people like you. You know that? It's because of people like you. Because, oh my God, we just got to support Biden because, if we don't support Biden, we're all going to die. Trump, you are pushing the kind of Trump derangement syndrome, right? Donald Trump, they're jailing the Uhuru movement. A group of Black revolutionary activists are facing 10 years in prison because of people like you, Hans, because people are more afraid of this invisible Donald Trump boogeyman than they are of the low-wage police state and the danger of World War III. They're throwing Black revolutionaries in prison because of this kind of stupid, hysterical atmosphere that you're espousing. This stuff, there's all this stuff about, Russian information is good. This is the kind of stuff that's destroying America, right? This is the kind of stuff that will destroy America, is this kind of stupid, hysterical. He wants us to believe that 1 out of 10 Americans, 1 in 10 Americans is on the verge of committing a mass hate crime, right? 1 out of 10 Americans is wearing white sheets and a Nazi costume. You want to talk about a vicious, evil lie, right? A vicious, evil lie that is used by the most evil people, that's used by the Joe Biden crime family to get us to vote for them and support and get them to take us closer to World War III, to funnel money to Ukraine, to actual Nazis. Now, what percentage of the Ukrainians are Nazis, Hans? I bet it's 0, huh? Right? Anyway, I've given this loser too much attention, but it's a great example here. He just came on here, tried to trigger a fear reaction in people to get us to vote for Joe Biden by smearing. As critical as I am of Americans, as much as I know they don't agree with me politically, 1 in 10 Americans is not a white nationalist. And the data that you cited, which you still haven't provided a link for, right? We still don't even know. You just maybe even just came up with it off the top of your head for all we know. Doesn't even say that, right? You took a poll where people said something might be acceptable in the context of people being called that every day and said, therefore, 33 million Americans are actually Nazis. That is unbelievable, right? Unbelievable, right? And what is going to be the result of that? I mean, it's like, this is the disinformation, this is the disinformation that's hurting the country. All right, next question. When you say the storm is coming, what about the giants, Raytheon, BlackRock, others? Don't they see this? And yeah, they do. And that's what their agenda is about. That's why they're pushing a low-wage police state. That's why they're pushing degrowth, right? That's why they're driving down living standards. That's why, read about what I talk about in the book, right? I talk about the agenda, the Bonapartist agenda that's being pushed by the ultra-rich right now, the low-wage, high-tech dark ages they're trying to implement, is an attempt to stabilize society in the face of the storm they know is coming. They know it's coming too, and they are fighting among themselves. The ruling class are fighting among themselves about how to deal with the coming storm, right? And that's what the Bonapartism is. You can bet they know about it. But the lower levels of capital also knows about it. And there are, there are divisions in the ruling class about this. So, yeah, and they know about it, and they're fighting about it. Right? There's one faction in the ruling class that has one agenda to resolve the crisis, the long-term crisis of overproduction. And there are many other sections of the ruling class that are resisting their agenda. So there you go. All righty. Has any anti-imperialist government ever said anything explicitly about Susan Sontag and the CCF? Yes. First of all, during the Soviet years, there was a lot written from the Soviet side about the Congress for Cultural Freedom. There were a number of communist publications that revealed the CIA funding of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. There were a number of like Soviet magazines and Soviet-aligned Communist Party magazines in like Italy and France and places that talked about it. We have republished the writings of Fidel Castro, where he talks about it. Fidel Castro gave a number of lectures in his final years of life. After he retired, then he was writing regular columns for the Granma, which was the daily newspaper in Cuba. He wrote a lot about the synthetic left. He quoted, the writings of Daniel Estulin and others, and he quoted Lyndon LaRouche. And go and read. We published a volume of the writings of Fidel Castro on this topic. Because they are in the public domain. John McCarthy just posted the link. Fidel Castro exposes the synthetic left. We actually got it on record, that yes, Fidel Castro has talked about it. But there is much older stuff than that. In fact, I believe at one point, they keep changing the Wikipedia page for Congress for Cultural Freedom. But at one point, the Wikipedia page did talk about the Soviet Union and their like documenting of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. But I think that may have been wiped from the page. But yeah, the Soviet Union did highlight and promote that the Congress for Cultural Freedom was going on and was a CIA operation. There's been a lot written about Encounter. So there you go. But there's a number of academic books. Oh, there you go. John McCarthy, super chat. Thank you for the super chat. Fidel Castro exposes the synthetic left. So there you go. There you go. There you go. All right. Thoughts on the theory propagated by Stalin that Churchill had Roosevelt killed? Well, again, this is one of those things where we can't necessarily say we know that happened because I'm not, I can't prove to you that that happened. I will say that I always get suspicious when people die at very convenient times, right? And that the death of Roosevelt was right as World War II was ending, right as the ruling class was transitioning to the Cold War. And we all know, it's well documented, that Roosevelt wanted to continue being friendly with the Soviets. Roosevelt liked Stalin. He liked the Soviet Union. And that Roosevelt had plans to prosecute members of the capitalist class who had collaborated with the Nazis, people like Henry Ford, people like IBM that designed the punch card machines for the Holocaust, etc. So you look at that, you look at the timing of the death, how it happened just as the war was ending, just in time for Truman to become president, drop the atomic bombs, and remobilize U.S. society to hate the Soviets, something that Roosevelt was against. it's an interesting timing. But, as far as do we have a smoking gun, can we get up and say Roosevelt was assassinated? We can't say that because we don't have smoking gun proof of it. There are theories that have been floated by various people about how this could have happened. And the timing of the death, very odd, very, very odd indeed. But we can't say that, right? Unless we know for sure, we can't say that, right? There's been a number of deaths that happen at weirdly convenient times, right? Chokwe Lumumba, a black nationalist communist, got elected to be mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. And then, like, right after he was elected, died of a heart attack. Again, was he assassinated? I mean, I can't say that. I can't say that because I have no evidence of that. But his death was like, it's like, how does a black communist get elected to be the mayor of a major U.S. city and then he just dies right afterwards? Very odd, right? So that's all you can do, right? That's all you can do when there's a death that happens. But I'm not ready. You got to be careful. You can't hang your hat unless, when people start telling you, I've heard various theories about how Roosevelt could have been assassinated, but I can't vouch for any of those theories, right? All I can say is you're right. Stalin did believe that at one point. And the timing of the death was very convenient. All right. Any books on African communist leaders? Yes, there are. Thomas Sankara, his writings are amazing. He was the leader of the revolution in Burkina Faso. He's got some very, very good, interesting writings. The African leaders, the books on Africa are over here. I recommend there's a book called the Hot Cold War, the USSR in Southern Africa, that was written by a former KGB officer. And it goes into great detail about all that the Soviet Union did to aid Nelson Mandela. Now, one book that I've wanted to read, I've just not been able to get my hands on a copy, is the leader of the Derg in Ethiopia, right? Mengistu. He has an autobiography, right? Mengistu was the military leader in Ethiopia who came to power. And my understanding is that he came to power. He led the Derg, which was the pro-Soviet military government, and that he's still alive. Or did he die? I mean, he fled to Zimbabwe after they were overthrown. And he wrote an autobiography. I would like to read it. I would really like to read it. About the autobiography, the memoirs of Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam, right? They're listed on Amazon, but I don't see an English edition, right? It's an obscure book, but I would love to read Mengistu's autobiography. Mengistu was the leader of revolutionary Ethiopia, and I would really like to read what he had to say. I will say that the writings of Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, he wrote Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. That's a very powerful book laying out how Western colonialism keeps African countries impoverished. That's a very, very powerful book. Kwame Nkrumah's book. And of course, great African leader is Muammar Gaddafi and the Green Book. We published his. That was the first book CPI ever published, was the Green Book, Gaddafi's ideological manifesto, laying out his beliefs as an African socialist, anti-imperialist, Soviet-aligned leader. There's a number of African revolutionary leaders that are worth studying and looking into. There's a lot of them. Many. Look, the Zimbabwe Revolution. There's a lot of great writing about that. Zimbabwe, many heroic anti-colonial struggles there. There's a book published by Monthly Review magazine, Building Socialism in Tanzania, and it's about the government of Julius Nyerere, right? Julius Nyerere was the leader of the revolution in Tanzania. He was China aligned, and I found that book to be fascinating. I was reading about how Julius Nyerere worked with Mao Zedong to bring railway into Tanzania. I read about that. Fascinating how Mao sent Chinese volunteers to build railroads in Tanzania. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there as well. But yeah, get a copy of the Green Book. That's the first book the CPI ever published. All right, folks. Well, tomorrow night I'll be live with Jose. Jose, the great disruptor. He goes to events and disrupts, and puts out an anti-imperialist perspective. I'm going to be going on his YouTube channel, so that's going to be pretty cool. So tune in for that. All right, folks, I'm going to put on the closing music and call it a night. Surge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.